The crowd was clapping so loud that the sound shook the walls of the old community hall. Children were standing on chairs. Women were waving handkerchiefs in the air, and even the men, usually quiet and stiff, were shouting her name. "Grandma Rose! Grandma Rose!" they cried. And there she was, a little old woman with bent shoulders and wrinkled hands, standing proudly on the wooden stage. A medal hung around her neck, shining like gold under the bright lights. It was hard to believe. The same woman who once begged for food at the market. The same woman who had walked barefoot with a leaking basket on her head, while people laughed at her torn clothes. The same woman who years ago, everyone said would never rise above her poverty. Now they all stood for her. Respect, real respect, was in their eyes. And Grandma Rose? She smiled, but tears rolled down her cheeks. But just as she lifted the microphone to speak, a loud bang echoed from the back of the hall. The doors flew open. A group of men stormed in, their boots pounding the floor like thunder. The crowd gasped, children screamed, and the cheering stopped at once. One of the men pointed a finger straight at her and shouted, "You don't deserve that medal. Everyone needs to know the truth about how you got here." The hall went silent. Grandma Rose froze. The respect she had just earned trembled in the air like smoke ready to vanish. What truth was he talking about? What secret did she hide? Before anyone could answer, the scene faded from her eyes. She remembered the smell of smoke from her old cooking fire, the rough taste of watery soup she used to drink, and the long nights she went hungry. Memories of her journey began to pour back into her mind. Memories of how it all began. Years before the medal, before the cheers, before the accusations, there was only poverty. Grandma Rose had once been nothing but a barefoot girl with dust on her face and hunger in her belly. She grew up in a broken wooden hut on the edge of the village. The roof leaked when it rained, and the wind whistled through the holes in the walls at night. Her mother, thin and tired, would sometimes cry silently as she stirred a pot of soup so thin that even the rats seemed uninterested. Rose was just a child then, but she could see the pain in her mother's eyes. Poverty was like a shadow that followed them everywhere. At the market, at school, even in church. People whispered behind their backs. Children laughed at Rose's clothes, which were stitched together with patches of different colors. One afternoon, Rose came home from school barefoot, because her slippers had fallen apart on the road. When she stepped into the hut, her mother sat on the floor, holding a torn letter in her hands. Her hands shook as she read it over and over again. "Mother, what's wrong?" Rose asked, her voice small. Her mother lifted her head, eyes red. "Your father is gone." Rose froze. "Gone? Gone where?" Her mother pressed the letter to her chest. "He has left us. He says he cannot carry the burden of poverty anymore." The words hit Rose like stones. Her father had abandoned them, leaving only silence, sorrow, and an empty hole in their lives. From that day, everything changed. The small family became smaller, and survival became harder. Rose began to help her mother at the market. She carried baskets of tomatoes on her head, though they were too heavy for her little body. Sometimes people bought from them out of pity, but most times they mocked them. "Why don't you wash your tomatoes, little beggar girl?" A woman sneered once. "No one wants your dirty food." Rose lowered her head, fighting tears, while her mother whispered, "Don't mind them, my child. One day we will rise." But the days only grew darker. There was a night when the rain poured so heavily that the roof of their hut collapsed. Rose and her mother ran outside with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They spent the night shivering under a tree, soaked to the skin. By morning, their few belongings, mats, pots, and old clothes, were destroyed. Rose's mother looked at the ruins and whispered, "We have nothing left, Rose. Nothing." But Rose, though small, clenched her fists. "We still have hope," she said. Her mother looked at her, surprised. A faint smile flickered on her tired face. That was the first time Rose decided she would not let poverty win. From then on, she worked harder than ever. She ran errands for neighbors, fetched water, and swept compounds. Sometimes she was paid with coins, other times with scraps of food. Each time, she carried her little earnings home with pride. But just when it seemed they might survive, disaster struck again. One evening, as Rose returned from the market with a basket of bread crusts given by a kind baker, she found her mother lying on the ground, coughing blood into a rag. "Mother!" Rose cried, dropping the basket. "What's wrong? Please talk to me." Her mother's voice was weak. "It's the sickness, my child." Rose shook her head violently. "No. You'll be fine. You have to be fine." But her mother only smiled faintly and touched Rose's cheek. "Remember, my daughter, respect is earned, not given. Promise me, Rose. No matter how poor you are, never lose your dignity." Rose promised. She promised with all her heart. But little did she know, that promise would be tested in ways more painful than she could ever imagine. Because the very next morning, the sickness grew worse. Rose had no money for medicine, no father to run to, and no family to help. She was just a poor girl with a dying mother, and no one to turn to. As the sun rose over the village, Rose knelt beside her mother, praying desperately. "Please God, don't take her away from me. Don't let me be alone. Not yet." But as her mother gasped for air, the truth became clearer with every passing second. And then, her mother's eyes closed. Rose screamed. The world went dark. Rose clung to her mother's body, her tears soaking the old wrapper that covered her. The tiny hut felt colder than ever, as if the walls themselves mourned. The only sound in the room was Rose's cry, sharp and painful, echoing into the silence. "Don't leave me, mother," she whispered. "You promised we would rise. You promised." But promises could not bring back the dead. By noon, neighbors began to gather. They peeked into the hut, their faces heavy with pity. Some shook their heads and whispered to one another, "That poor girl. Alone now. She has no one. No father, no mother. What will become of her?" Their words cut into Rose like sharp knives. She wanted to scream at them to stop, to leave her alone, but her voice was buried under grief. The burial was simple and quick. A shallow grave was dug behind the hut. Rose stood barefoot, watching as her mother's body was lowered into the earth. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Every handful of dirt that fell over the body felt like a piece of her heart being buried too. When it was over, the villagers went back to their lives. But for Rose, life had stopped. That night, she sat in the corner of the hut, hugging her knees to her chest. Hunger twisted her stomach, but she couldn't move. The darkness outside seemed to creep into her soul. She thought of her mother's last words. "Respect is earned, not given. Never lose your dignity." But how could a poor, lonely girl like her ever have dignity? For days she survived on scraps. Sometimes she begged at the market. Other times she searched for fruits in the bushes. People stared at her with pity or mocked her for being a beggar's daughter. Some even threw stones at her when she came too close to their stalls. "Go away, hungry rat," one woman shouted once, chasing her with a broom. Rose ran until her chest burned, hiding behind an old tree to cry. But she wiped her tears quickly. She remembered her mother's words. Even in hunger, she refused to steal. Even in shame, she refused to give up. Still, poverty has claws that dig deep. One evening, as the sun was setting, Rose walked past a group of children eating roasted corn. The smell was warm and sweet, and her stomach growled so loudly she held it with both hands. The children laughed and waved their corn cobs at her. "Hungry girl, come and watch us eat," they teased. Her eyes filled with tears, but she turned away. She would not beg. She would not let them see her broken. That night, she lay under the leaking roof, staring at the stars. "If only I could climb up there," she whispered. "Maybe I would escape this pain." But the stars gave no answer. Weeks passed. Her clothes grew more torn, her face thinner, her eyes sunken. Yet deep inside, a tiny fire still burned. The promise to her mother. She began to look for small jobs. She fetched water from the stream for women who could not carry it. She swept compounds, cleaned pots, and washed clothes for a few coins. Most times, the people cheated her, giving less than promised. But Rose never complained. She kept her head high. One day, an old man at the market noticed her. He was a shoemaker named Mr. Henry, with hands always covered in polish. He watched as Rose balanced a heavy basket on her head, her little body trembling but refusing to drop it. "Girl," he called, "why do you work so hard?" Rose wiped the sweat from her face. "Because I must. I have no one." The old man studied her, then nodded slowly. "Come tomorrow. I will give you work in my shop. Rose's heart leapt. It was the first good thing that had happened in a long time. The next morning, she went to his shop, a small wooden shed filled with shoes, tools, and the smell of leather. Mr. Henry taught her how to polish shoes, how to fix broken soles, and how to shine them until they looked new. At first, her hands fumbled. She spilled polish and pricked her fingers with needles. But she did not give up. Every mistake made her stronger. Every cut on her hands made her wiser. Soon, customers began to notice her work. Some smiled and said, "That little girl polishes shoes better than grown men." For the first time, respect began to show in people's eyes. Not pity, not mockery, but real respect. Rose's fire burned brighter. She saved every coin she earned, hiding them under a small stone behind the hut. With time, she could buy food, soap, and even a new wrapper to replace her mother's torn one. But just when hope seemed to return, poverty struck again, this time like a thief in the night. One evening, as she returned home from the shop, she noticed the stone behind her hut had been moved. Panic gripped her. She bent down, heart racing, and lifted it. The coins were gone. Every single one. Her savings, months of sweat, hunger, and tears vanished in a moment. Rose dropped to her knees, her body shaking. She searched the ground, hoping maybe some coins had fallen out. But the earth was empty. Someone had stolen everything. Her hard work, her hope, her future. Gone. That night, Rose did not sleep. She sat in the darkness, her hands gripping her knees. Her mother's words echoed again. Respect is earned, not given. Never lose your dignity. But how could she hold on to dignity when everything she had was stolen? As dawn broke, Rose made a decision. She would find out who had taken her money. She would not rest until she did. But the truth she was about to uncover would shake her more than she ever imagined. Because the thief was not a stranger. It was someone she knew. The morning sun rose slowly, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. But for Rose, the world was still dark. She sat by the stone behind her hut, staring at the empty hole where her coins used to be. Her hands shook with anger. "Who would do this to me?" she whispered. "Who would take everything I worked for?" Her mind raced through names. Maybe it was one of the market boys who always mocked her. Maybe a stranger who had seen her hiding the coins. But the stone had been moved carefully, almost gently, as if by someone who knew her secret. Rose's heart sank. Someone close. She spent the day watching, listening. At the shoemaker's shop, she could barely focus. Mr. Henry asked her if she was feeling sick, but she only shook her head. Her thoughts were heavy. When evening came, she returned to the hut. Children were playing outside, chasing each other with sticks. She noticed one boy in particular, Daniel, the son of a neighbor. He was poor too, always wearing the same torn shirt. But today, Rose saw something unusual. His feet were covered in new sandals. Sandals. Her breath caught. Daniel had never owned new sandals in his life. She walked up to him, her voice trembling. "Daniel, where did you get those sandals?" The boy froze. His eyes darted left and right. They were a gift. A gift from who? Rose pressed. He looked down at his feet, shifting nervously. I don't remember." Rose's heart pounded. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Daniel, don't lie. Did you take my money?" Daniel's face went pale. For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the laughter of other children. Finally he whispered, "I'm sorry." The word stabbed Rose's heart. "You," she gasped. "You stole from me? You, Daniel? I thought you were my friend." Tears filled Daniel's eyes. "I was hungry. My mother is sick. I wanted to buy food. But when I saw your coins, I couldn't stop myself." Rose felt torn in two. Anger burned in her chest. But at the same time, she understood his pain. Hunger was a cruel master, one she knew too well. Still, betrayal hurt deeper than hunger. "You could have asked me," Rose said, her voice breaking. "I would have shared with you." Daniel's head dropped. "I know. But I was ashamed." Rose turned away, her heart heavy. She wanted to scream, to cry, to hit him. But instead she whispered to herself, "Respect is earned, not given. I will not let this break me." That night, Rose lay awake, staring at the roof. She thought about her stolen money, her broken trust, and her mother's words. She realized something. Poverty could steal food, money, even family, but it could not steal her strength unless she allowed it. So she made a choice. She would start again. The next morning, she returned to Mr. Henry's shop earlier than ever. She worked harder, polishing shoes until they shone like mirrors. Her fingers ached, her back hurt, but she refused to give up. Customers praised her, some even tipped her. Slowly, coins began to gather in her little pouch again. But whispers followed her wherever she went. She's all alone. That girl will never survive. Shoes won't lift her out of poverty. Maybe she should just marry early and end her suffering. Rose heard them all, but she ignored them. She was determined to climb, no matter how steep the mountain. Weeks passed, and she was beginning to feel hope again. She even forgave Daniel in her heart, though she never gave him her trust again. Then one fateful afternoon, disaster returned, this time in a form she did not expect. She was polishing a customer's shoes when she heard a loud crash outside. People screamed and ran in all directions. Rose dropped the brush and rushed out. Smoke filled the air. Flames leapt high from the row of market stalls, devouring wood, cloth, and food. Fire! Fire! Voices shouted. Rose's heart stopped. The fire was spreading fast, and it was heading straight toward Mr. Henry's little shoemaker shop. Her only place of work. Her only chance at survival. If the flames reached it, everything she had rebuilt would be gone in minutes. And then she heard it, Mr. Henry's desperate cry from inside the shop. He was trapped. The fire roared like a hungry beast, swallowing everything in its path. Thick smoke curled into the sky, choking the air, while villagers ran with buckets of water that seemed too small, too weak against the raging flames. Rose stood frozen for a moment, her eyes wide as she watched the fire spread toward the shoemaker's shop. The heat licked her face, and the sound of crackling wood filled her ears. Then she heard it again, Mr. Henry's voice. Help! Somebody help me! Rose's heart leapt. The old man was trapped inside. She looked around. The men in the crowd were shouting, some pouring water, others dragging baskets of goods away from the fire. But no one moved toward the shop. No one dared. It was too dangerous. Rose's legs trembled. If she entered that fire, she might never come out. But if she stayed back, Mr. Henry, the only man who had given her a chance, would die. And with him, her only hope for survival would burn to ashes. Tears pricked her eyes as her mother's words echoed in her head. Respect is earned, not given. Never lose your dignity. Rose clenched her fists. She knew what she had to do. Before anyone could stop her, she sprinted toward the flames. Rose! No! Voices cried behind her. But she didn't turn back. The heat was unbearable. Her eyes stung, her throat burned, but she pushed forward, covering her mouth with her arm. Inside the shop, she could barely see through the smoke. Tools and shoes lay scattered, some already on fire. Mr. Henry, she shouted, her voice hoarse. Rose, came the weak reply. I'm stuck, my leg, help me. She followed his voice and found him pinned under a heavy wooden shelf that had fallen. His face was pale, sweat mixing with soot. Hold on, Rose cried. She grabbed the edge of the shelf and pulled with all her strength. Her arms shook, her knees wobbled, but she refused to give up. At first, the shelf didn't budge. She gritted her teeth, her lungs burning from the smoke. I won't stop, she yelled, as much to herself as to him. With a final scream, she heaved with all her might. The shelf shifted just enough. Mr. Henry dragged his leg out, groaning in pain. Come on, Rose urged, pulling his arm. Together, they stumbled toward the door, flames closing in around them. Just as they reached the exit, a burning beam fell from the ceiling, crashing down in front of them. Sparks flew, blocking their way. For a moment, Rose froze. There was no way out. Mr. Henry coughed violently. Leave me, Rose. Save yourself. But Rose shook her head fiercely. No. I won't leave you. You gave me hope when no one else did. We will get out together. She looked around desperately. The flames roared louder, but then her eyes landed on a small window at the back of the shop. It was narrow, but maybe, just maybe, they could squeeze through. Come on, she shouted, dragging Mr. Henry toward it. She kicked at the wooden frame until it cracked. The smoke was thick, making her head spin. but she forced herself to stay awake. Finally, with one last kick, the window broke open. Bright light streamed in. "Go," Rose urged, helping Mr. Henry climb through first. He struggled, groaning in pain, but somehow managed to squeeze out. Then it was her turn. She pulled herself up, her hands slipping on the hot wood. The fire was behind her now, roaring like it wanted to drag her back. She pushed with all her strength, her lungs screaming for air. Just as she pulled herself halfway out, the roof behind her gave way with a deafening crash. The flames surged forward, hotter, closer, faster. And in that split second, the window frame cracked beneath her weight. The flames did not win. Rose escaped that fire, scarred but stronger, with Mr. Henry at her side. That day, the villagers whispered about her courage. The poor, barefoot girl who once begged for scraps had rushed into fire when even grown men stood back. Respect, real respect, began to bloom like a seed in dry soil. From then on, Rose's life was never the same. She worked side by side with Mr. Henry, learning everything he knew. Soon, she could fix sandals, boots, and even craft new shoes from scraps of leather. Customers began asking for her by name. Coins filled her pouch again, but this time she kept them safe. With every coin, she rebuilt her life. But Rose did not rise alone. She remembered her mother's words about dignity and chose to help others. When hungry children came to her, she shared her food. When Daniel, the boy who once stole from her, returned in shame, she forgave him and even gave him work in the shop. Slowly, she became not just a shoemaker but a leader. Years passed. The girl called Beggar's Daughter grew into a woman respected by all. She expanded her trade, teaching other orphans skills so they could feed themselves. She rebuilt her hut into a real home, where no rain leaked and no stomach went empty. One day, the village elders called her forward. "Rose," they said, "you have turned poverty into strength, shame into honor. You have lifted not only yourself but many others. Today we honor you." And that was the moment. The moment she stood on stage, the medal shining around her neck, the crowd chanting her name. Grandma Rose. Her hands, once blistered from carrying baskets, now held awards. Her feet, once bare and cut by stones, now stood firmly in shoes she had made herself. The same villagers who once mocked her bowed their heads in respect. And when the children asked, "Grandma Rose, how did you do it? How did you rise from rags to respect?" she smiled and told them, "Life will test you with hunger, with betrayal, with fire. It will strip you bare until you think you have nothing left. But remember this, respect is not given to you. You must earn it. And you earn it not with riches or titles, but with courage, honesty, and kindness. Poverty is strong, but dignity is stronger." The children listened wide-eyed. The elders nodded. And Rose, now old and gray, knew her story had become more than her own. It was a torch, a light for anyone still trapped in the darkness of poverty. From rags to respect, that was her journey. And her lesson to the world was clear. No matter how poor you are, never let the world steal your dignity. Hold on to hope, work hard, stay kind. And one day, the same people who laughed at you will stand to honor you. Sparkle's life lesson. Poverty may steal your possessions, but never let it steal your dignity. Respect is built through courage, perseverance, and kindness.